Today we're going to talk about the about integrating with third-party applications. Let me share my screen. Screen one. Hopefully everybody can see it. And yeah, of course, so we're gonna start with the safe harbor. We're gonna use some, if we use some statements today that relate to future features and so on. Please take those with the rules that are mentioned here in this page. Right. So let's start with the agenda for today. Even if some of you might already be familiar with the Automation Hub API, we're gonna take a short tour of the API and how to use it. Right? So we're gonna start with that, and then we have some really interesting use cases that we wanna look at, including some integrations with Teams or Excel and Power BI. Then we want to look at best practices of how to use the API, some special query parameters, and of course, last but not least, we're gonna discuss about the documentation of the API. Right. So hopefully it will be an interactive session. As Christina mentioned, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A section at the very end. So, as I mentioned, we're going to start with how to use the Automation Hub API. Just a short recap for those who are already acquainted. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what is the Automation Hub API? And the answer to that is it's a way to access the Automation Hub data programmatically. You basically have access to a set of endpoints that have one-to-one relationships with features that you have in the interface. Like for example, get automations. The endpoint has a correspondent with the Explore Automation program, right? And almost all the data that you have in the interface is also available via the API. So to access the data, you need to authenticate, right? You need to authenticate using a token that's generated from the Automation Hub interface. And using that token, you will basically authorize your request. And we have a permission system in place that will make sure that you have access to the exact data that you have access to also in the interface, right? Now that you have access to the data, you have to use it, and you can use it to either build your reports or integrate with third-party applications. Now, deep diving a bit on how to authenticate, right? The authentication model for the Automation Hub API resembles a lot with the personal access token from GitHub, for example, right? So you need to generate the token from the Automation Hub interface. There's a special area that you need to access. It's underneath admin, platform setup, open API, and then generate your token. While you're generating your token, one thing that we ask for is an app key that is basically used to differentiate between tokens generated for different scopes. Like maybe you want to use a token for Power BI, another token for your connection to Excel or Slack or whatever, right? So this is what the app key is used to differentiate. Then very important is the type of token. We have a user token and what we call a userless token. And this is not like a drop down in the interface. You just identify these by by assigning or not assigning a user to the token that you are generating. Right. If you assign a user to the token, then the permissions for that user are automatically associated with the token and with the data that comes back from the API. And if you have a userless token, that's a more generic token that is used for less endpoints, and it could be used without associating it with the user. This is something that we also call like a tenant level token, right? But it has less permissions because it has also like less auditing available. Last but not least, Set the expiration date. So you need to set up the expiration date for the token. Based on that, your token will expire at a certain time, and that's how you actually control it from the interface in Automation Hub. So that's the authentication part of it. Going forward, we're going to deep dive a bit on the permissions. So how the permissions work, right? So we mentioned earlier that we have like user token and userless token, right? So the advantage of generating a token with the user associated is the fact that it gives you access to absolutely all the endpoints, and it applies the permissions for that user, right? So it doesn't apply your permissions necessarily. It applies the users that you're actually associating with that token, right? So if example, if I generate a token and I use Andre users to associate to that token, then that token will have permissions as Andre has permissions in Automation Hub. On the other hand, the userless token doesn't need a user, but like I said earlier, it's just applicable to a certain number of endpoints, endpoints that do not necessarily need are safe from let's say also security and data privacy standpoint. Like for example, the get automations endpoint doesn't work with the userless token because get automations um, as I mentioned earlier, is the same thing, is has the equivalent in the interface of the automation Explore automation program. So in there, users can see just certain parts, certain ideas based on their permissions, right? So it's not okay to expose that for a userless token. Then on the automation hub permission side, they're based on the permissions that you have. So for example, maybe you are a standard user only on finance and accounting. That means you're only allowed to view and submit ideas, but not do anything else. Then if you use, for example, get automations endpoint, you'll be able to get only the ideas on finance and accounting that you have access to, right? But you won't be able to use other endpoints, like for example, you won't be able to use the change status endpoint. So everything that all the permissions that you have in the interface with the granularity that we have already in Automation Hub and that we presented in previous webinars are available exactly the same in the API. Right, so you have the permissions, but how about the documentation, right? There's a couple of things that we need to know about the documentation. We have Swagger, we have Postman, and we have the UiPath docs. Now, um, the Swagger documentation, this is what we call as like the source of truth. It's the main documentation where we always expose like the latest and greatest on the API. And it has also an interface where you can actually test out different endpoints, right? So you can just authorize here, add your Open API token, and then you can play with all of these endpoints in here. So, and it also contains like a very a good amount of documentation, right? So for experimenting and having also always the source of truth, that's where we use Swagger. Now, coming back to the PowerPoint, we have next Postman. The Postman is the Postman benefit is the fact that you can use the collection, right? You can use the collection from the Postman documentation, and you instantly have access to all the examples that you have in here in our collection. Like for example, you can have access to how to get automations based on a filter for the status, right? So you can take the entire connection, run it directly in Postman, and then you can use the endpoints from there. I actually use it and I customize it after I import it in Postman. And the easy part here is that you just generate the variables for the token and the app key, and then you're all set to go. All of your endpoints will work after this is set up. Now, the last, the UiPath docs, are super useful for generic information about the API, as well as videos and best practices, right? So one example that I have open here is, for example, how to merge, actually have to query the data, query and parse data in Power BI or Excel. Right, so this is a set of best practices that you can find only in the docs, and there's also a video attached in here that explains to you step by step how to parse the data, right? So different documentations for different documentation types for different scopes. Now, with that said, from the let's say recap of how to use the API, I think we're all set, and we can go next to our use cases. And the first one is how to integrate with Excel and Power BI. And we have a couple of documentation available in this area. But today I'm going to show something that I saw that a pain point that I saw frequently on our customers, right? And um, basically, as a short description, we want to today to manipulate data with this integration between Excel and Automation Hub. The use case is to extract collaborators for each idea and split the columns by using their roles. Now, this is something that, like I said, I saw very frequent, and it's a way that you can manipulate data so that afterwards, with that the report that you extract, you can use it either for your reporting if you have, or you can even have like other call to actions, like other APIs that are triggered based on what you extract in here, right? So let's have a look. So for this one, I'm going to show you this Excel, right, which has a connection in place to the Automation Hub API. Now, I won't enter into details onto how to set the connection, but I will enter directly in the Power Query Editor and walk you step by step through everything that I performed in here in order to get to this data. Hold on one second. I don't know why. Oh, it's opened, but in another. Ah, here it is. Okay. So starting from the source, right? So I start by just connecting to the Automation Hub API, and first I just want to query get automations, right? I query get automations. It's a very simple query that just brings me in the first instance just this message status code and data. Then what I want to do next is one thing that we add as a best practice, the pagination. So in order to add pagination, you first need to navigate from the source to the total pages, right? The total pages indicates exactly that, the total number of pages that comes down as a response. So this number can be variable, dynamic, based on your number of items. So in my case, it's 3. It can be 4, 5, 10, depending on the number of items that you have. Then what I do is I convert this into a list. So I basically have a list with all the numbers of the pages that I have. So 1, 2, 3, right? Then I want to convert this into a table, and I'll actually rename it to be called page, because I'll use this exact identifier in my next queries. And in order to use it in my next queries, I also want to change the type. So I want to change the type of this column called page to be a text, right? You can see here type text. Good. Now, the next thing that I do is I add a custom column, which is this one in here, and I add some special. I can actually open this up so you can see the formula behind. So this column, what it does is that it actually triggers another endpoint. This time I use like a mix and match. I trigger an endpoint for the automation pipeline, and instead of getting all the items, I get the items page by page using the variable from the page column, right? Actually using the page column as a variable. Right? So what this formula basically does is just like it triggers the endpoints, and it actually triggers three endpoints for page 1 and 2 and 3, right? And it brings me the data into this custom column that I added. Good. Let's see. Okay. Then, of course, I'll get a lot of records for this custom column, and I'm interested to expand at the first instance only the process ID and the process name, because this is the one that I will actually use to get the collaborators. So for these processes, I'll get the collaborators, and I'll need an identifier also for the processes themselves. So I choose the process ID and the process name. Then I want to rename the process ID. I'll actually rename it to ID, because again, I'll use it in the next one of my next queries. I'll change the type to again be text, because if you want to use this in another query, you want your data to be a text, to be a string, sorry. And then I add another custom column, very similar to what I did earlier. I add another custom column, but this time I'm triggering the get collaborators endpoint. So I'm triggering the get collaborators endpoint for each of these items that you see here in the page, right? And I want to get and when I have the ID, and here, I actually put the ID from the column that I just converted earlier, right? So I'll get the collaborators for each of these ideas. Now, again, I'll expand it to the records that I want. And at this point, I have multiple records, of course, because I have entries for each user email. So I have an entry for me, for Theo, for Sorin invite, and so on, right? And what I want to do is my end goal is to have on the columns the roles, and on the on the rows, I want to have only this process name, but I want it to be unique. And then on the values, I want to see the email addresses. So in order to do this, what I do next is that I extract the roles, right? Let me Yeah, I extract the roles first. And from the roles, I'm interested in the role name. So I want to see the process owner, change request submitter, citizen developer, and so on. And then I want to remove the columns that I don't need. So I end up only with the process name, user email, and role name. And the last thing I do is I pivot. So I pivot on the user roles name, which will appear on the columns, and then I get the user email in the actual values, and I don't aggregate. Um, and once I remove the errors, what you'll get is a table that contains the process name, and then an entry, a column entry for each role that you have as a collaborator, right? So for example, if I take vendor name check, right? So vendor name check doesn't have a process owner, but you can see that we have a a project manager associated. We have Theo there. We have a solution architect, Jane Doe, and what else do we have? And we have also the citizen developer submitter, which is myself, right? So all of this data, you can close and load it, and then you'll have it associated into your Excel or Power BI, because I showed you in Excel because it was easier. But you can add the same type of data into Power BI and refresh it every time you want. Really cool, right? And a very easy way to solve your use case. Now, an easier way to solve your use case is to leverage also the insights integration, right? So we actually had customer discussions about this where we, both me and Julia shared examples of how to do this using the API or how to do this easily using the insights integration with Automation Hub. Because in there you have the data model with all the data from Automation Hub, and you can start from the built-in tables, from the built-in dashboards, but you can explore the data and you can work with that data to get you exactly the visualization that you see in here, right? So I encourage you to have a look at that. But coming back to our next use case for the API. So this was Excel Power BI integration. Let's go to use case number 2, integrate with Teams. So I really like this one. I enjoyed working on it, and I think it has like a very good potential. It can be expanded in many ways, but we started from the pain point of notifying the idea approvers about the ideas they need to review action upon. And you're going to ask, okay, but why Teams? It can be Teams, it could be any other application. It's important to keep the users in their ecosystem if they use Teams on a daily basis. And you want them to also be engaged in, for example, unblocking your automation pipeline from Automation Hub. Then maybe you want to keep them in Teams, but integrate with Automation Hub so that they have the relevant information in in teams where they work more frequently, right? So this is the use case that we start from. And we actually have a bot for this, um, which does the following thing. So it fetches data from Automation Hub and sends it to Teams using a webhook that we set up on the Teams level. And I'm going to show you a bit what that means. So in the robot side, we basically get the ideas from Automation Hub, and here we actually get ideas. We filter the ideas based on their status. So 46 is idea awaiting review. Category is the exact category for the user that I want to announce, to update. And I also use like a special type of parameter in here called plain text conversion equals true. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to parse the description. And the description is normally by default is in rich text. And I want it to look good when I send the message in Teams. So plain text conversion equals true converts any text field that you have from rich text to plain text, which is really awesome. Right. So I have also the app key authorization and everything in here, and basically I get this get idea response, which I have it stored as a variable, and then I do two things. I deserialize the JSON from the get idea response. So I get this get ideas response deserialized. And then I deserialized also the JSON array. So, I do this because the data that I'm looking for is in a format of an array, which lies underneath data and processes. Right, so I have to look a bit at the structure of the JSON and get exactly the array that I'm looking for. So I have this JSON array as a result, which I'm going to iterate through using a for each. And I'm going to do for each item in this JSON array, I'm going to extract the idea name, idea slug, and idea description. And I'm just going to show you once how to do this. So you just iterate for each item. The process name is the indicator from the JSON, and I just convert that to string. Now, I have all my data available, and what I want to do is post to Teams. So in order to post to Teams, first, what I want to do is actually read a text file that I have for the webhook body. So this is the my project folder, and in my webhook body, I actually have all the the code that I need to send this to send this message using the webhook. Now, there is this is called like an adaptive message in Microsoft Teams or Outlook, and you can customize it as you want. I mean, you can add different actions and different URLs and so on. For this one, we have just a few simple items. We have a couple of variables defined in it, like the idea name, the idea description, and also the idea slug. And we also have some URLs. Like for example, this is the URL, which will be dynamic based on the idea slug. But you can do a lot of stuff in this one, including sending back information to Automation Hub. So what I do with this one, I just read it, and then I go back and I actually replace the data. I replace the idea name in the file with the idea name from my variable, and I do the same with the slug and the description. So basically, in the end, I will have a variable webhook body for each iteration in here. Right, and finally sending the actual webhook. So the webhook URL I have here, and I have this WH free, which I'll actually used to send data to this is the end of these replacements, right? So I have WH3, which is the final variable that I use in here. Now I'm going to show you Teams. So basically in Teams I have this channel that I have that I call ID approvers. In here we will receive the notifications. And just to show you the webhook, in order to add a webhook in Teams, and this is also you can search for it online. You need to click on this connectors, and you have the option to add an incoming webhook, right? So this is an incoming webhook. You define it in here, and then you are able to trigger messages to this channel. In our case, we have already configured the webhook in here. It's called test Sorin, and basically what you need to use in the HTTP activity is this URL for the endpoint. Good. So now coming back, once we saw this, so I'm going to run this directly in Studio. So let's just run the file. And once it'll finish, all right, we get back. So we have two new messages in Teams. Automation idea credit card limit process needs your attention. Andre, we have this assigned to Andre. You can parse also the status. I didn't do that, but you can parse also the status to have this dynamic. The short description is the one that we already parsed. So we parsed the slug. You can see that the slug is correct, and I'll actually show you that it takes you to the correct place. Credit card review process. And then you have the option to review an Automation Hub, which again points to the same thing. And we also have something that you can explore more. You can actually change the status in here. And for example, I mapped it to the status that we have in Automation Hub. And on save, you can trigger an endpoint, the endpoint to change status in Automation Hub, so that you have the status updated once this is finished, right? So a really interesting way to interact with Teams, right? You keep your user engaged, you unblock your pipeline, but in the same time, you keep them into the same ecosystem. Right? And I saw some really other cool integrations that are available using this Teams, and this webhook option is really interesting and pretty easy to set up. Now, coming back to the presentation, so we saw Teams, and I mentioned earlier that, yeah, Teams is a very good, it's an option, but it's not the only option. So I have a bonus use case. It's integrating with Slack. So we're going to have the same use case, right? So we want to notify idea approvers about the ideas they want to review and action upon, right? And this time we're going to send the information to Slack, not to Teams. So I'm going to open up the second project, which is this one. It's it's basically the same. I mean, it's performing the same steps. It does have a different configuration in here, meaning that the category is different. I set up the category to be 451, so you'll see slightly different results in there. But I use the same plain text conversion, and I use also the same status 46, which is idea awaiting review, right? So I performed the same steps. The only difference is that, of course, in order to actually send this to Slack, we need a different type of webhook because, yeah, the webhooks are configured differently. So first of all, in the actual project, you'll see that uh, we have the endpoint for Slack, and here we have like the authorization. Now, in order to create this type of webhook, the first thing you need to do in Slack is to actually add a Slack bot. After you add a Slack bot, you'll have access to this simple webhook that allows you to post a message to a channel. You can see here that I have the channel ID, and then inside the actual activity, I have the body that I need for this webhook. And let's have a look at the webhook for Slack as well. So I have it in here, Slack demo. So again, I'm going to read the webhook body. So it's slightly simpler. It has a couple of sections. It doesn't have all the data or the formatting that we had for the ones for Teams, but it does the trick, right? So I'm actually what it has additional in here is that it actually tags also the user. So it will tag me on that channel saying that I need to action upon an automation idea, right? So this is again, you can read the Slack documentation and respectively the Microsoft Teams documentation to see how this webhook body should work. What we did here additional using the robot is just replacing the values so that we have this dynamically for each and every webhook. Additional to that, especially on the Microsoft Teams on the Microsoft Teams use case, you can actually use also the activity pack that we have built in Studio. I just use the webhook, but you can use that activity pack as well. So I am going to open up Slack. We have this channel in here where you can see we had we have a message with the webinar, and here is where we will receive our two messages. So I'm going back to Studio. I'm going to run this file, and once it will finish, we will get two messages in here tagging me saying that I need to act upon these two ideas: quota creation and venue vendor creation, right? So I have the URL parsing, which worked, and I have also this review and automation hub. It's again a URL parsing. I didn't do anything extra to parse like the status, but I did parse also the description. So this one came from dynamically from the API. Pretty cool stuff, and like I said, a really good way to keep the users engaged in their own ecosystem. Now, before we get to our Q&A session, let's talk a bit about best practices. So one of the things, some of the things that we consider best practices, we already kind of captured them in the demo that I showed earlier, right? But in this slide, we will, and you can see that we have also hyperlinks in here. You will have access to the relevant documentation for each of these best practices. So the first one is the one that I actually touched upon earlier, is about using pagination, right? So using pagination is a really good way to improve the performance of the API, right? Because if you get a large number of results in your response, and you maybe combine one or two queries and so on, then you'll see that if you refresh the data, it will be laggier and laggier. So with pagination, you resolve that. You can use, for example, limits in pagination for like I don't know, 50 or 100 items per page, and you don't have to care about the total limit, right? So if you get 3,000 items in total, you don't need to care about if you have 3,001, because this pagination system automatically helps you to do that. And I showed you how it works earlier, and it's also described in this page, how to use pagination to actually um, get all the items dynamically. And of course, this example applies to Power Query from Power BI or Excel. It can easily be applied also to other mechanisms, including if you use a robot to trigger the API. The next one is filtering your data. So filtering your data is extremely important, again, for performance reasons, and also to get the exact data that you need. We don't recommend that you always pull all the data, right? Maybe you just need, like I showed you earlier, just the ideas that are in a certain status and on a certain category. We have a lot of filters in here that can help you. For example, just to give you a glimpse of like get automations, like all of these filters, like category, applications, phases, status, and so on, created, start, and end. These were all implemented based on your feedback, and they were implemented to resemble the exact filters that you have also in the interface, right? So use them so that you get exact the data that you need, especially when you have a third-party integration, like I showed you with the ones in Teams. It's much easier to get exactly the two responses and iterate for them than get like all the responses and then filtering them in, I don't know, in a data table in Studio, and then sending the message, right? So one that's filtering data is one very important item, and filters will be added periodically to our API. We will have also new ways of filtering the data and so on. Now, merging the data, it's something, or like just using different queries is something that, again, I showed you with how I combine the get automations with the get collaborators, right? But you can do this with larger sets of data as well. The example that I have in here, in this automation hub power data parsing, is actually combining data from get automation and get automation pipeline, right? Using a way to using the merge queries that you have in Power BI or Excel, and it's basically just merging queries based on two identifiers that you have in both of them. Like you can use the automation ID and use that as a unique identifier and set up the relationship between the two. The end result will be a larger data set that contains both of all the relevant data for you. Next, using the submit idea endpoints. Now, we had something that we call now legacy. We had endpoints that were used to submit idea that we have, like, for example, the post automation idea, which was a very simple post call to submit an employee driven idea. And we had also the post COE driven idea. Now, these calls became not usable when we allowed the assessment customization. When the assessment customization was in place, was released, then these two calls were no longer they can no longer be used. they're no longer supported. So what we created in order for to support the assessment of any customization is the new idea submit idea endpoints, which they're actually paired endpoints that rely on first getting the data. So I want to submit an idea. I first want to get the assessment that I want to submit the idea on. Maybe I want to submit on the a COE idea, right? So when I want to get that detailed assessment out, and maybe I want to get it for a specific category ID, right? So I want to get the exact assessment on the category ID, finance and accounting. So I have my data. Once I have my data, one interesting thing that happens in the response is that at the very end of the response, we actually give you the structure that you need for the correspondent post call, because the post call expects, if I scroll down, expects exactly this. It expects the user inputs and all the fields, all the correspondent fields that you have for that assessment, right? And they always have to work in pairs. And in order for this to work, you first need to use the get one and then the post one. And as I mentioned, the get one at the very end has this structure for the that you can use in the post call, in the payload of the post call. And you can use, for example, if you use Postman, you can use either Postman variables or even Postman tests to just make these calls work together, or use a robot to make these calls work together dynamically by first getting the data that you need and then submitting it back. Coming back, using the Postman collection. So I mentioned a lot about the Postman collection, and I think it's really really useful. Like when you hit run in Postman from the Postman documentation, you basically get absolutely everything that all the examples of the endpoints that we have, and you can set up all sorts of environments in here if you wanna test. And again, what I mentioned earlier, like the Postman test and so on, these can easily be used and saved in your own collection, so that you can further leverage the API. The Postman collection is a really good starting point. And last but not least, check for updates. Check for updates in either our Automation Hub release notes or in the Swagger documentation, because we improve the API as a business as usual process. Every improvement that we make to it evidently gets posted into the release notes. And once we do an improvement, once we do a change, we make sure that it's always backwards compatible with what we have already implemented as endpoints for as existing endpoints for the Open API, right? So these are a set of best practices of using the API, and I think with that we can switch to Q&A to see if we have some interesting questions in there, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question if you have like different use cases or want to ask questions on what was already presented.
I think we have like from the beginning, I think 2 questions perhaps were left unanswered. It was from Stefan. Stefan, would you like to unmute and ask the question? See, Julia and answered a lot of questions, and also your colleague. Let's see.
Christina, I can help with mitigating the remaining questions. So I think Stefan joined like maybe a bit earlier. So first of all, the recording will be available after the session. If you missed something, there's not a problem. You can rewatch the exact part. Sorin indeed showed earlier example of integrating with Excel and how do you extract the collaborators in order to make use of that information more granularly. The question from Stefan was whether this use case, well, the use case was not around Power BI, it was around more like Excel, but you were asking whether there is any integration possible without any scripting or tool between Automation Hub and Power BI.
Yeah, I think Stefan can unmute now if he wants to ask.
Yeah. Sorry. Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, exactly. It was just a quick question. So nothing so much about details, but that would be just my interest. So if that would be possible, yeah, because I've seen some other colleagues, they are having created some Python scripts that are somehow in between. They are looking, so in this case, into the orchestrator and kind of grabbing the data, putting it into a text file or CSV or something, and then the Power BI sits on it and pulls the data. So that's why I was thinking maybe you can directly grab the data in Power BI from the automation hub.
Yeah, that's the scripts that I showed you earlier. Those are all generated based on the steps that we performed actually in Power BI. So everything is done in the interface, and you all start by just selecting a data source in here. You select from web, and then you connect to the automation hub endpoint. Right. So once you have data in this format, so once you authenticate in here, you can already Excel will already open the very first step that I showed in the demo. And then even for this one, I didn't do any scripting. I just went step by step. Like if you want to go step by step to go to the next one, you just hit record and so on. In the Power BI parsing demo that I have on the UiPath Docs, you'll see how this is performed step by step without any scripting at all.
Looks nice. Thank you.
Problem.
Anyone else wishes to ask a question? Sorin?
Hi,
Hey, Manoj.
yeah. So can I just ask that we already have got integration with APIs, that is all correct. So do we have any kind of an integration with webhooks? So whenever a person updates anything on the automation hub, be it any idea or just change any value or any parameter there, will be notified via some channel, could be Teams, Slack, anything. So is there any kind of those pattern available with automation hub?
There is not so far or currently, but we are actually working on that, and I think that's a very let's say good use case for what we have in plan for the Open API for 2023. Right. So if you have more use cases on that, or if you want to have a separate call to share your feedback, it would really help. But basically, you kind of summed it up, at least from the beginning. We want to have different events that are triggered in Automation Hub that you can use to get data out from our system, instead of getting all the data up or just like comparing statuses and so on. Right. A good example here is just like when an automation changes status from one to another, trigger this integration. Right. Yeah, that's what we're aiming, and we would definitely love more feedback on that as we build the solution.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Sorin.
I see we have one more question from Andrew. He is asking whether it is in the pipeline to post components which specifically like to link source control items rather than files, so it should be possible, right?
It's not so we don't have an endpoint to post components yet. We have endpoints to get components, but I think the use case that you're looking for is more related to what we refer to as the automation hub feed for components, which is feature that we have on the backlog. You would basically, and actually I think it's more than that, because the feed was the feed as we thought of it initially as an MVP was aiming to use the orchestrator feed for components. You actually want to go more than that and want to go wanted to link the source control items rather than the files. So yeah, this use case is not possible yet using the API, but I think it's actually more linked to this component feed rather than exposing a new endpoint for post components.
Okay. We have 7 more minutes, so if you guys want to unmute and ask more questions, this is the time.
Actually, I do have one more question for you, Sorin.
Yeah.
So do we have a list of all these applications which can connect to Automation Hub? Like you mentioned Power BI, Excel, you showed demo on Teams and Slack. Are there any other applications available?
Well, it depends on what you on the application and if it supports integrating with. So far from the demos that we did and from what we know from customers for reporting purposes, we had integrations with Excel, Power BI. I know there was one example with Tableau as well. And on integrating with other type of applications, we had ServiceNow, Slack, Teams, as I showed you now. But it all depends on the capability of the application. For example, Slack and Teams, I use the same mechanism. I use the webhook. For ServiceNow, for example, you would have to build a bit of code into ServiceNow. Of course, depending on the version of ServiceNow, that actually triggers the endpoints. And it's kind of similar to any application. If that application allows a connection to a web API, then you can probably do what I showed you today in the demo. So there's no list. I would like to say that the list is infinite, but yeah, it's we don't have necessarily a list for that.
Actually, I was looking for more ideas around integrating Automation Hub with Tableau because we are using Tableau within our organization. So just wanted to get an understanding on how that thing works.
Yeah, I don't have we have that I don't think that we have that documented, but I'm pretty sure that there was a use case that we can probably document on how to connect with Tableau. Very similar to what we use for Power BI, but just yeah, we can take that action point and add that into our documentation.
Perfect.
We
Thank
have
you.
one more question in the chat from Bea. Is there an example of pulling successful robot runs from Orchestrator into Power BI?
I didn't necessarily experiment with that, but I would say yes, because the Orchestrator API allows you to pull the exact robot runs together with a lot of other parameters on the runs from and not only from the Orchestrator. And you can easily use the exact same mechanism as I showed you earlier. You just need to, well, I think like maybe for Orchestrator, there's an extra step because you have the OAuth token versus our personal access token for Automation Hub. But when you pass the authentication part, you can pull like whatever data you want from the available endpoints from Orchestrator. So I would say yes. I don't know again if it's documented, but we can check, and I'll add it into the slides. Into the slides Q&A, because all these questions will also be available with the respective answers in the presentation.
So you will have a complete log of the questions and the answers also in the presentations, which will be on SlideShare. Both SlideShare and the recording will be on the event link to which you are RSVP'd for the event today. So you will have that available starting tomorrow. Earlier, I shared also the links to the upcoming sessions. And I think I will also share my screen now if there are no more questions. Oh, we have one more. There is from IG. Will the Automation Hub API collections be uploaded to the UiPath Postman public workspace?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet, but I think we can probably do it. The answer is not yet, but we can definitely think about that. It's just one click away.
Okay, and one more question from Syed. Is there a way we can get robot utilization data for unattended, like we have 24 hours runtime available and the bot runs for 12 hours, means we have a 50% utilization?
I would
Maybe
say that
I will jump in a bit. That's more like an Orchestrator related question, and the focus of today's session is more like the Automation Hub API layer. Of course, we can explore and deep dive on this by consulting the existing documentation for the orchestrator to see what they expose. It might require additional parsing to get that answer. But what I wanted maybe to focus, because there were still like some questions remaining related to the automation hub part, and maybe let's focus on these ones. Sorin, there was an interesting question around the integration with Jira on premises. I gave the link towards the Jira Cloud integration, which is like, let's say, out of the box. I was curious to hear your perspective on how can you recommend someone to integrate with Jira on premises with the existing capabilities that we have around the open API layer.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yeah, currently the Jira integration that we have is only available on cloud, is relying on the integration service, which again has a connector only for Jira Cloud. But for Jira on premise, depending on on how exposed is Jira, the Jira on-premise instance, meaning if it's exposed to the internet, if it's running only on a VM, and if you can use the existing APIs for Jira, you can probably use a robot like I showed you today to manipulate data from Automation Hub and send it to Jira. Like a simple ticket creation from Automation Hub, that's definitely something that you can probably do. It would help if you would have webhooks in Automation Hub to send that data to Jira, like in a more structured way, like only when an event happens in Automation Hub. But if you just want to share it, like create a ticket periodically, for example, I'm sure that using a robot and using the HTTP activities, you can plus our Automation Hub Open API, can pull data from Automation Hub and send it to Jira server.
I think I see there are still questions, but we are on top of the hour. Can we give like an email or direct them to community for the following questions?
They will be answered also in the slide deck in the Q&A part.
Yes, I was wondering about the questions that are still wanting to be asked, because I see there are raised hands in the session still. So,
Okay.
Azizul, let's take this chance. So please ask. Let's take the last question and then we can wrap it up.
Right. I think it's not more of a question, it's just of a feedback, because currently previously we have tested the JSON output, and then the output doesn't tally with the UI information. If, for example, I have a process submitter that is available in the UI, but the data does not appear in JSON file, JSON data. So there's a data discrepancies there when I extract it via API and in the UI. So with that, with whom can I liaise with so that I can deal with the data discrepancies so that we can move further with the data?
I think like there shouldn't be any data discrepancies, but if you saw and you have like an example that you can share, I think you can use directly our support form to get in touch, because it's probably something that our support team needs to investigate and treat it as a normal incident, right? But yeah, I'll share in the email in the chat. Sorry, also my my email address plus the email address of the Automation Hub, the generic one of the Automation Hub team. And yeah, for all these type of requests, you can reach out to us, including for extra questions.
Okay, sure. I'll share the feedbacks through email then. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can wrap it up. So as was said before, you will find all these questions and answers also in the presentation. In the deck, you will be able to download from SlideShare. You can see here our upcoming session. We have 2 more sessions. One on October 18th, Automation Hub best practices reconfiguring Automation Hub, and the last session on November 24th, engaging with users to contribute in the automation program. I will share again the links. So you will be able to RSVP now, save the links, and also you will have the link for today on email. So you will receive an email following the event with the recording and the SlideShare link, the wrap-up link for the event. And if there are any more questions, I think Sorin probably, yes, already shared the email addresses for Automation Hub. So thank you everyone for today, and reach out to Sorin, to Automation Hub team, or to us, community.uipath.com or community@uipath.com with any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the questions. Thank you everybody.
Bye.